Okay, we are now live.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
All right. So ethics. I guess what is it? Just we talk about what they are first, or how they shape leadership. All right.
So, like, first we have to define ethics.
Okay.
So, what the book said, or what I found in the book, was ethics refer to the standards of moral conduct, to judgments about whether human behavior is right or wrong. So I think that was like pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's like determining, or like, if something is right or wrong.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me.
Yeah.
I guess I feel like it's pretty. I don't know. This chapter feels like it's kind of obvious. Like they even did. Like the only thing I could think of going through the chapter was like different leaders, and it like the first paragraph that mentions like Hitler and Stalin, and it's like that's like the perfect example for how ethics affects leadership. Like you could be, I mean, you could go to the extent of saying like they were they were a good leader, like they led people, but ethically they're like terrible people.
Yeah.
And I guess that like so it goes to show like how your ethics shape your leadership. Like you could still be a good leader and like people will follow you, but that doesn't make you an ethical leader. Like there's a difference between good leader and being a good leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things in like the Stalin and like Hitler aspect where it's like because you can be like an effective leader and get like a following, it doesn't always mean that like what you got, like how you got those followers and what they're standing for is going to be like morally sound. But it's almost like some of those like traits or tactics that you would use as a leader can be like used in on good and bad terms. And it's kind of how you like when they talk about like propaganda and stuff with like the Nazis and all that, how propaganda can be used in a way that's like morally correct or like good values, and how you can do it in like a negative way and create like hate and stuff. And not going to point any fingers, but it's kind of going on today.
Yeah. Just like kind of going back to the first point about like defining ethics, I think like it's super relative. Like I don't remember if the textbook touched on this, but there's like a ton of different situations where it really just depends on all the like variables. Like it's super weird. I was watching this show. It's called The Good Place. I was just binging it. I was bored, but they had this example of like the train track, and you're on track to hit 5 people, or you could switch and hit 1 person. And it's like, oh, you would just hit 1 person, but what if like the 5 people were all murderers and the 1 person was like a doctor or whatever? So it's like, it's totally just up in the air, and it's like super relative. So I don't know. I think like the study of ethics is super just whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like the right thing or the wrong thing. But yeah, it can definitely shape leadership, like you guys were saying.
Kind of. I know, like Kaitlyn just kind of summed it up. It's like the right thing or the wrong thing, and I find it interesting a lot. Like I was just on Twitter, and I was like, Jerry Rice, who is like a receiver in the NFL, was talking about how he admitted to using Stickum, which was something that helped him catch the balls like 20 years ago, and he just justified it because everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
So like ethically, like I see that a lot. I feel like it's like, oh, well, everyone's doing it. So if I don't, where's that going to leave me? Like I'll be left behind. So I just always, I find that interesting. Like within my own job, I've seen some ethically, like some things done that were not ethical at all. And it's kind of like, well, how am I going to get ahead if everyone else is doing it? And like, one of my old favorite UFC fighters always said, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And that like immediately came to mind, like with this chapter. So I don't know, just some random thoughts, but
yeah, it was, I don't know. It's like tough for me too. Cause there was in the book, it talked about, like lying to people. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's hard to determine exactly what is ethical without getting too far into it. Like where if you there's a difference between lying to somebody just because you don't want to tell them the truth, and there's a difference between lying so that they don't find out something that can hurt them. Like at what point does that become unethical, and when's it ethical to lie? So there's like this whole like a back and forth thing in the book about like it really comes down to you. Like we could all see the same exact thing happen, and maybe 3 of us think that it's ethical and the other 3 think it's not. So I think really it comes down to there's always going to be people that think it is, and there's people that will think otherwise. So it just depends on, you're not going to have every single person in the world follow you, but there's going to be people on each side.
Yeah, for me, the person that was interviewing for this for the project that we have to do, he is in the military, and he was talking about how good leaders like have to have a good moral compass and stuff like that. And he gave an example about how, like, of course, like there's going to be casualties and stuff in the military and war and whatnot. And he was talking about how they have a number, like an acceptable number of how many people, like how many casualties that there can be or whatever, and how many basically not allowed, but like are okay to die in order to like complete their mission or whatever, which sounds really messed up. And so, but where he ties in his moral compass is he always goes in with like 0. Like his goal is to have 0 casualties and stuff like that. But he mentioned that there are people in his same position who are like, we're going to do what needs to be done in order to complete our goal, you know? So I think it's things like that, you know, where there always has to be, you know, at least one person who can stand up and make that choice, who hopefully has the right moral compass. And yeah, that's especially in public leadership and stuff like that, because it's not just you who would be messing up and like not following the ethics. It's a whole group of people who would like get messed up. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what we're talking about right now has to do with what we talked about last week as well, with culture, that you can come in with your own ethical ways of doing things, but if there's like an underlying thing, like, I don't know, I like what Mark said just about cheating, how when everybody else is doing or everybody else is lying or something like that, it's kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because now I can't compare to them because they're not doing it the ethical way, I guess. But if that's the culture of where you are and where you work or what you're doing, it's almost like you kind of have to follow the crowd to be anybody, unless you just wanted to leave or quit. And so that's super weird. I don't even know. But I wanted to read this part in the book. It's in chapter 9. And it says, engaging in two-way communication and building symmetrical relationships encourages ethical behavior. And so I thought it was interesting that they are explaining that when we're united, when we're communicating together, and they use the word symmetrical, that would increase like more ethical behavior. And I feel like it's because 2 people are now deciding to choose these things that are morally correct, instead of maybe just one person doing it and then one person not being ethical.
Yeah.
I liked what Kiana was talking about with, you know, who she interviewed, how, because like in like retail jobs, you know, they expect a certain percentage of loss, you know, just like, you know, a certain number of lives are lost. And it's like, oh, well, I can lose up to 10% and it's going to be okay because that's the company's standard. But, you know, kind of like what Alec was saying, I almost feel like you just need to find a job or a career where you feel comfortable, you know, with, you know, Tim was saying 3 of us might think one thing's ethical and the other 3 might think it's not. So it's like, we ultimately just need to all find, you know, a culture that, you know, we can fit in with, or that we can help influence, you know, and that we're on the same page as.
Yeah.
I think like what Kiana said too goes into like the last part of the discussion about how it shapes leadership, or how it shapes the group, because she mentioned something about how what the leader does affects everybody as a whole. So I think that's like a perfect transition to the last part. So I mean, really, when you have a leader, whether you want to or not, they somehow like still kind of in a way manipulate what you do, whether it be a boss or like a friend that just makes the decisions for you. So if you have someone that's ethical, you tend to kind of I guess the best way is that you feed off of a leader. So they kind of lead by example in a way. So if your leader's unethical, you might be unethical, and it might change your perspective on other things. Whereas if you have an ethical leader, you might be the complete opposite. Like you might be careful about what you do and think about stuff before you do it, because it will affect I guess it could just affect like the group that's being led, but also it could affect somehow like the whole butterfly effect. It could affect somebody like not in the group, and it could affect like someone like across the globe somehow.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tim, where it's kind of one of those things where if your leader is being unethical or ethical, like whichever side you want to go on, it almost like just because they're a leader and they have the influence they do, it makes things more acceptable. Where even if like personally before, let's say you were under that leader or in that company or organization, that those would never have been values that you would have found like ethical or that you could never see yourself doing. When you're just kind of exposed to that environment, it's kind of like you're like a product of your environment and the things that, like go on around you. So if you have a leader who's like being more ethical, let's say you were someone who like might not have thought of those things, it just makes you more like conscientious. When like on the flip side of things, like if you had a leader who was doing unethical things and like it kind of trickled down to the company around you or the organization, it might make it seem more acceptable because you're kind of just like it's like engaging in like mob appeal. And then at that point, you're kind of like the UFC example is good too. It's like, well, if everyone's doing it, it doesn't seem as bad. But it's like you can as a leader kind of control those types of things where it's like, no, we're gonna make that feel like out of the ordinary for our organization or company, because we're gonna hold ourselves to like a higher standard than that of like the competition or those that you might be like in working with or something like that.
Yeah. So like the last part of the prompt, it kind of talked about how we should discuss how ethical behavior is reflected in public leadership. Like the way I read this was like politicians. So I think that's like a big topic right now. How like ethical like standards are held really in politics. I think it's definitely changed, and I think we're as a country like more lenient, I guess, on ethical standards for our politicians. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's for like that specific like example, like politics. I don't know. It kind of seems that way, like with CEOs, politicians, like the people you would at most expect to be ethical or that are supposed to be held to higher standards are usually the ones that are unethical. And I don't know. I guess like in public, it may come with that sense of power. Like when you're dealing with public figures, they have a larger following. And I don't know if it's like the power trip or what, but usually I would think most of the time, like the people I would most expect to be ethical are the ones that aren't, even if we don't know it.
Yeah. I think power and being in such a big leadership position where you have the opportunity to make so much money and to basically just control everything does make people not care about how they were raised or how they feel like they should morally act or be, that they kind of can justify being unethical because they're just wanting things for selfish reasons, I guess. And I feel like before that wasn't, I don't know. I don't want to say before just because I'm young, but I feel like the country in general was more aligned together. Like everybody always was in different political parties, but I feel like more and more it's just becoming like people are just justifying like different actions, and everybody just has so many different opinions that you could stop and be like, well, what is ethical? What isn't ethical? And be confused because everything is kind of just crazy. And I feel like people are power hungry and money hungry.
I think something like for that one, I don't know. I don't remember seeing anything in the chapter for, but I think that's like one of the issues where you have too many leaders, maybe. Mm-hmm. Especially, like, I guess politics would be a good one. Like we have people that run against each other, and sometimes at a time it's like for one party you narrow it down to 3, and it starts at like 12. Like, when you have that many people in a leadership role trying to go at it, obviously there's going to be different groups that start, and every single group's going to have a different viewpoint on ethics. I think that's just one of those things where you may just have too many leaders or too many people trying to be leaders of the group.
Yeah, and I don't think it's as much as like not knowing what is ethical and what isn't. I think it's that people in these, like, since they have such high positions and people are just ignoring it because they're scared of that authority figure. Like they don't have as much power as the person who is being unethical. So who are they to say something or do something about it? So they're kind of just letting it slide, which, you know, is just taking advantage when you have that position of authority. That's like, you're the one person who has to be the most ethical, you know, and so it's really taking advantage of that power and stirring people wrong. And I guess it does kind of make it a little bit of a gray area, because if they're the ones setting those examples and those standards, then they're like breeding other people under them to be unethical. So, you know, maybe you're right.
Well, I think we covered everything in the prompts. I want to make sure Andrew goes and eats because he's hungry. So I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Alrighty.
Awesome.
See you guys.